Okay, welcome back to another lovely state mandated meal break. And I just wanted to do a quick video on to expand on something that anybody who's known me for more than 5 minutes has heard me say. The real war in this country and actually in this world is not left versus right, it's not black versus white, it's top versus bottom. It's the haves versus the have-nots, and that's the way it's always been. So, what I propose and what I'm hoping for is, even on the eve of what's almost assuredly going to happen when the verdict for the Derek Chauvin trial is announced, what I propose is that we stop doing their damn work for them. Just stop. So, essentially, it's a numbers game, okay? So, when I say stop doing their work for them, I mean them being the elites, them being the government, them being the haves, and us being the have-nots. We're being pitted against each other constantly. Now, why would they do that? Why would they go to all that trouble, you ask? And I answer. Well, allow me to retort. It's a numbers game. It really is. When you think about the distribution of wealth and power in this country and actually in the whole world, there is a whole hell of a lot more of us than there are of them. The bottom line is the numbers aren't in their favor. Even with tanks, jets, bombs, it doesn't matter. Ask Afghanistan. Those guys have fought two of the greatest empires in modern civilization to a standstill, and there's way less of them. They're on home territory. So, here you go. Current military service, including the Guard, their reserves, all of these things, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, estimates are between 1.9 and 2.3 million current, and that includes cops as well. So if you were to add them into this. So there you go. On our side of the coin, there are 380 million guns in the hands of civilians in this country. If you were to go back in history, one of the better generals in the Japanese Empire actually told Emperor Hirohito that attacking the United States directly would be the worst kind of folly, because in the United States, behind every blade of grass is a gun. That was back then, and it's only gotten more stout since then, gun ownership. So, 380 million weapons in the hands of private citizens. 17 million of those weapons that were purchased last year were first-time owners. First time, never owned a gun in their life. So that tells us several things, actually. One of the things that it tells us is that a lot of people see the sense of the Second Amendment now. They're actually catching on that it's actually necessary. Another thing that it tells us is that they see the attempts on the Second Amendment to get rid of it, they see those as a legitimate threat. So basically they're like, yeah, hey, I got to get a gat while I can. There's a lot of people who see that coming. So let's go back to the 2.3 million troops that could possibly be mustered against us, the civilian population. It is my guess that about 25% of them will not fire on a civilian population. They don't want to kill their own American citizens. Another further 50% of that number wouldn't follow that and wouldn't choose to fire on the U.S. population because it's an unlawful order. So one of the things that people don't understand about the service is somewhere in that 300-page contract we signed, like I've said before in other videos, there's a clause that says you are not required to obey any unlawful order. Now, you ask, how can it be unlawful for them to deploy on U.S. soil when the Guard is already running around D.C., they're running around California, and they're enforcing these policies? Well, here's your answer. The Guard is a different animal. The Posse Comitatus Act Let's see. We're checking notes today so I can keep on track. Posse Comitatus was enacted by Rutherford B. Hayes in 1878. That is USC Section 18, USC 1385, also known as the Knott Amendment. Okay, that prevents the federal government from deploying troops, federal troops, on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens. So the National Guards, as you know, are attached to states, and when they're activated, they are federalized and paid through the federal government, but they're not actually federal troops, as I understand it. There's some contractual differences. So here's your answer. Even if the Insurrection Act were put in place and they could muster all 2.3 million troops minus those 75% that I just mentioned, which is a pretty realistic pretty realistic estimate, honestly, that leaves them with 575,000 troops and police officers who might fire on U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. Let's contrast that with our numbers. Take that same 75% discount, if you will, on people who might or might not fire on U.S. soil or U.S. citizens. Let's just take our 380 million minus that 75%. That still works out to 95 million people. 95 million, okay? So 95 million versus 575,000. That's only good odds if you're amongst the 95 million, okay? The reason I'm throwing these numbers at you, and the reason that is an explanation for why the elites are pitting us against each other, is because they can't win. They can't. You know what? I looked it up. Even if they mustered every troop that has ever served in the United States military from the beginning of time, if they could resurrect the dead, they would still only have 57 million versus 195 million. Yeah, that still doesn't work out real well in their favor. You know, I mean, the Revolutionary War was fought against overwhelming odds. Afghanistan, you know, they handed us our ass. But, you know, those are the things you got to think about. You don't need tanks, planes, bombs, and guns to fight a war. You need numbers, man. The equipment's great, but wars are won in the will, and they're won by people, men and women willing to stand up. Okay, so they know they can't win. They don't want to start that war, which, you know, realistically is pretty wise of them. So, what does it mean for us to do their work for them? Well, here's your answer to that. If we distract each other, if we kill each other, if we turn brother against brother, if we turn citizen against citizen, we're killing and disabling our own organization. Our own potential is what we're killing. All right? The other thing is that they're using us against each other to create a world so chaotic that people willingly submit and willingly give up their freedoms in the name of security. Well, see Ben Franklin on that. He says, if I remember right, just a paraphrase, he said, a man who sacrifices his rights in order to achieve security soon finds he has neither. Pretty wise guy, old Benjamin. If we start willingly submitting to that and surveillance and all of the things that are the goals of the elites that make us easy to track, easy to control, and then they disarm us, geez, that's not going to work out good for us. Not in the end. And it's happened before. It's happening all over the world, different places that apparently didn't realize that there was real life trouble in the mix, and they gave up their freedoms for security, and that just really hasn't worked out well for them. So they're using us. That's what they're doing. They're creating the chaos. They're sowing these seeds, and people are turning on each other so easily because they're being misdirected. See Patrick Henry on this one. You know, Patrick Henry talked about a lot of that kind of stuff about the federal government. He wrote extensively in the Anti-Federalist Papers around the time of the ratification, of the Constitution. Okay. Now, I am going to close this out with a quote from H.L. Mencken, who was a journalist primarily for the Baltimore Sun, and I think he was back in the early 1900s, I think right around 1918, so right before the war to end all wars. And you can think on this a little bit. H.L. Mencken, Baltimore Sun, 1918. The fact is, the average man's love of liberty is 9/10 imaginary, as is his love of sense, justice, and truth. The truth is, when a man is truly free, he is more than a bit uncomfortable, alarmed, and intolerably lonely. Liberty is not a thing for the great masses of men. It is the exclusive possession of a small, disreputable minority, just like knowledge, courage, and honor. It takes a special sort of man to understand and enjoy liberty, and he's usually an outlaw in democratic societies. Are you going to be an outlaw? Keep your freedoms? Stop letting the government tell you that you need them for your security? Stop fight. Are you gonna stop fighting your neighbor and stop buying into the horse shit, and just take care of the take care of the micro, take care of your neighbors, take care of your family, give people cause for faith? How much do you love your liberties? Stop doing their work for them, or you're going to lose those liberties. Thanks, guys. Have as good a day as you can, and no matter what the verdict is, be safe. Okay, have some sense. Look for a little bit of peace in your own heart. Screw the rest of the world. Find some peace in your own heart and stop doing their work for them.